listen, you have a responsibility to improve people's lives. It is never about the technology. Technology is a means to an end.
Welcome to the Technical Difficulties Podcast. I'm Liz Gerber and a design professor at Northwestern.
And I'm Lauren Lynn, and I'm a student who has also worked in the design industry. Each week, we speak with women leaders in design and technology.
We are so excited to welcome Margaret Stewart, a leader in responsible innovation and design, advisor, and investor, and the former VP of product design and responsible innovation at Meta, where she founded the Responsible Innovation team. With over 25 years of experience, Margaret has shaped many of the iconic and consequential platforms we use daily, including Google, YouTube, and Facebook. Ethics in tech and design is critical, but how do we actually make it happen at scale? We can't wait to hear from you, Margaret. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Margaret, I met you at a very fancy dinner, and you were knitting at that dinner. And I'll never forget that moment. I was like, okay, this woman's got it down. Like everybody else was, noses high in the air, very sophisticated. And not that knitting is not sophisticated, but I was blown away. Blown away.
Oh,
Thank you.
I love that. I love that initial memory of
that.
Good one.
Never lose that one. So, okay, on to the career questions. What, if anything, would you describe as your I'm a designer moment or I should be in tech moment? Was there a moment or was this only in retrospect?
I am one of those people because I've been in this game a long time and there weren't programs in interaction design or user experience when I was going to school. I forget the statistic that the U.S. Department of Education had a long time ago, but the crazy high percentage of kids in kindergarten today that the jobs they will eventually do don't exist today. So there's not this notion that what you're going to be when you grow up or do for work. It's just kind of a mythology. And I was one of those kids who never really knew what they wanted to do because I was interested in so many things. In addition, this idea of working in technology or in design, quite frankly, was not something I grew up with. So I did not come from a family of designers or engineers, as some people do, where they have that working vocabulary. I stumbled into design mostly through theater, actually. So I was very engaged in lots of things, very happy to be at a liberal arts school at Boston College where I was able to take courses in lots of different things. But I had always done theater and loved the community and the collaboration of making live theater, which if you've ever done it before is one of the most intense group trust falls. It's you never know what's going to happen. Every night's different. There's so many people involved in making a production happen. And I love that sense of shared risk, shared reward, shared success. So love that. And, a lot of threads between that and working in a highly collaborative context of working on software. But I didn't know that was a thing at the time. So I then continued, as a person who was steeped in the humanities, to get really interested in design in the theater context around, designing the posters to promote the plays that I was associated with, or getting into scenic design. And all of a sudden finding out that design was a job that people had, which I didn't know. And then I thought I was actually going to do an MFA in photography or filmmaking, because those are things that I still love very much and I'm very passionate about, really all around visual storytelling. And this is what's funny and why you should always be open to serendipity, because you never know the twists and turns and opportunities that life will put in front of you. I sent away for the brochure to apply, because I grew up in the Jurassic period, where, you had a paper application that you filled out for school. And I sent away for the brochure from the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, an amazing film school. I was like, I'm going to apply to film school at Tisch. And I was just literally looking through the brochure and I was like, what's this thing? It's called the Interactive Telecommunications Program. I was like, that sounds awful. Because I did not know what interactive meant. I did not telecommunications sounded like the furthest thing possible of something that I would be interested in, because I thought of myself as like a creative artist. But then I looked at the description, and it was founded by this amazing woman named Red Burns, who was a huge mentor to me. And I'll tell you a little more about her in a second. But the description was that the program, which had been founded in the 70s, which is bonkers, was positioning itself at the intersection of art, design, and technology. And I was like, that's interesting, because I was a person who was interested in theater, film, photography, storytelling, but I didn't really want to choose. I was leaning into multimedia before I knew that that was a thing. And I read that description and I was like, I'm not going to apply to film school. I'm going to apply to this school. And what a gift. It was this group of students. Some had been teachers, some worked in government, some were designers, but not that many. Engineers. One of my fellow students was, I'm not joking you, the sword swallower at the Coney Island sideshow. This amazing collection of people that was kind of like a circus, literally, with a sword swallower mixed in, but this laboratory of collaboration. And at the same time, Red Burns was running this program and very much holding the bar high around, listen, you have a responsibility to improve people's lives. It is never about the technology. Technology is a means to an end. What are you going to do with it that lifts people up, that improves their lives, that addresses societal issues? And she also leaned really heavily into diversity in the student body. So a crazy percentage of the students were from outside the United States. It was by far the most which is not the only angle on diversity, obviously, but for me, it was a revelation. I'd never been in an educational context that was that international. And the alchemy that's created when you bring those different lived experiences together, the types of projects we did were different, the ways that we worked together, it was so fascinating. And that was my introduction to it. And in addition to the fact that when I was at ITP in grad school was when the first graphical web browser was released, Mosaic. So I didn't go into the program thinking, oh, there's a job where you can design technology. I didn't really actually understand what that even meant. But even I understood that giving people a graphical interface and allowing them to communicate and share their ideas was this amazing opportunity to democratize communication. And that I 100% got. So here I was, like a person who saw myself as an artist, then being motivated to say, I'm going to learn how to code HTML. Now I can build websites. Now I can do this. Now I can do that. And it was at a time where a single person could do the whole thing, which of course you can't anymore. It's quite a bit too complicated. So I really feel like I came of age in this magical time where everyone involved was new to it, and the technology was still simple enough that like a person like me that did not have a strong technical background could actually build experiences. And it's still that way to the degree that, there's now toolkits that allow you to do that. But I don't know. It was an amazing time. So that was my introduction to design, totally by accident, through theater, through a brochure that happened to have an art and design and tech program that I'd never heard of before. And then Red Burns, for whatever reason, seeing something in me and saying, like, come to this program. I think you have something to add.
Wow, that's amazing. Also, I totally relate as someone who cannot choose between many different interests, but hearing that Yes. They will come together some way, and maybe you add a little serendipity and spontaneity in those moments, and that can totally happen.
No, I was just going to say, I think cultivating a practice of staying open to those possibilities is so important. I think focusing is critical, but when you put too much of a narrow view on possibilities, you kind of lose the opportunity to see, again, where, things are coming together in unexpected ways. And just so many good things in my life have happened as a result of trying to be open to serendipity.
I love that. And now I'm curious, how did your pivot, or it's just another dimension added to all of your interests in responsible innovation and design, come about?
I think as a designer, and the training that I got of focusing on people and the problems and the challenges that they're facing kind of infuses into the DNA of your work perspective a sense of responsibility. It doesn't mean that, by the way, other people in different disciplines are not equally focused and caring about those things, but it's actually a part of the craft of design. You are supposed to represent the people using and interacting with the products in the product development process. And so there is I think, a special sense of professional responsibility for the designer to be that conduit. And as a result, if you're an empathetic person, you care about, what happens when what you build goes out into the world. And when you work on really consequential projects and products, and you see that sometimes that impact is not always the intended impact, you start to really focus on what can we do to mitigate that in the product development process. And so, I think early in my career, I was always thinking about this, but not in the way that I do today. And when I've reflected back on why that is, I think it's because in my early career, I was like a techno-optimist in the way that most people coming of age in that period of time when, the internet was exploding and we're going to empower everyone, really seeing all the positive aspects of that, but not spending enough time reflecting on how things could go wrong, how things might be misused, how things differ so dramatically around the world in different geopolitical and social contexts. And so it's not that the optimism piece is wrong, it's just not the whole story. And so I think that over the last, 5, 6, 7 years, it's been a particular focus of mine, and then eventually ended up being my more or less full-time focus to say, how can we evolve the practice of building these products to more proactively think about the ways in which things could go wrong, that people, and in particular already at-risk communities, could be harmed by what we build. And so I think, it's this movement from techno-optimism to techno-realism, because I also think that techno-pessimism is just as much of a false god as techno-optimism. The extremes are they're not an accurate view of the impact that technology has. Almost everything that you invent has benefits and potential downsides and harms. And the responsible way to design is to sit in that space and to manage the people who are on the extremes. So I think that was kind of my journey. I mean, I think it's also because I have always been a person that has gravitated towards complexity and seeing multiple perspectives on things. This is in part because I'm the youngest of 9 kids. So I grew up in a context where a means of survival was understanding where everyone was at and trying to find common ground. I also think that it's a result of me having dyslexia and constantly figuring out how to work within an environment that is not optimized for the way that my brain works. And that reality making me attuned to often unintentional negative effects on people. So I don't know. There's a few things about me as a person, my upbringing, and then also my professional experience that have kind of led me to this work.
That was brilliant. I'm dying to know what practical life skills you also learned as the youngest of 9 beyond understanding systems.
I mean, some are good and some are bad. I'm pretty good at conflict resolution, but I also have a probably overdeveloped ability to compartmentalize, which doesn't always serve me well in terms of my personal well-being, but is a very important survival tactic.
Survival tactic. I love it.
Yes.
As you were speaking, Margaret, I couldn't help but think, I've heard you say before that designing at scale requires humility and audacity. And I think that's a beautiful way of framing. I wonder if you want to if you still stand by that line, and if so, or if not, if there's modifications you would make to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely important for technologists to have the confidence to do things that people haven't done before. I mean, you can't lose all of your optimism because otherwise you would never create anything new. Then you're in a regressive state, which is terrible for society. But if you over-rotate on the optimism and you don't carry, especially, by the way, as like a very privileged person, if I don't carry a lot of humility into the room, because of my lack of exposure to the way a lot of people in the world live their lives and do their work, I'm going to create harm towards people, right? Out of my own ignorance. And so there's the humility around, knowing what I know and being honest about the universe of things that I don't know, that I think is crucial about that. I think what humility meant to me 20 years ago might be slightly different than what it means today, but I think it's always been true.
Yeah, on the topic of changing definitions of humility and also techno-optimism, techno-realism, I'm curious how your perspective on the power of design and technology has changed over time, and if there were any surprising realizations on the capacity of design to promise all of these good things in the world or bring about change.
I guess I would say that for design and technology specifically, that again, it's kind of restating the same thing maybe in a different way, is that the beneficial aspects of it have always been true, but it's not the whole story. And the extent to which something that produces good can also produce bad. People increasingly are leaning into binary thinking, where there's something is good or bad. And it's kind of almost never the case, right? And so I think that understanding that duality and sitting with it and designing with it in mind is, I think, the big shift. And I think related to that, and this is less about what we produce, but who we are as practitioners, the thing that has continually surprised me, and literally within the last several months, I've entered a new chapter of this, is the realization of how broad your education needs to be able to design responsibly at scale. I, in thinking about, because I've recently gotten involved a little bit more in teaching, which I'm very excited about, what does it mean to properly educate early career designers? And I have a hard time not defining that as the entire scope of a liberal arts education. That I don't think you can design responsibly without a working understanding of economics. I don't think you can design responsibly without understanding systems of oppression. I don't think you can design responsibly increasingly without understanding environmental science and climate change. It just gets so broad. And then of course, hopefully you're all fans of The Good Place, because you can't design responsibly without a solid foundation in moral philosophy. Because the fact is, almost all of these controversies that we sit in as a tech industry have to do with dilemmas that have no obvious answers to them. And people don't like to admit that. They don't want to talk about it because, again, they would prefer to see something as this company is good or bad. This technology is good or bad. And you see it play out right now in AI. Oh my God, AI is the total future and it's revolutionary, it's awesome. And AI is going to fuel the robots rising up and murdering all humans. It's kind of amazing. So I would say that the thing that has surprised me the most, and it's relevant to me because recently I've been leaning a lot more into studying climate change, studying economics, studying indigenous communities and indigenous wisdom. Man, there is so much that I still have to learn. Things that I wish I knew 20 years ago, but hopefully I'll be on this earth for at least a few more decades. And so to be just a lifelong learner.
Oh my gosh. You could just mic drop right there, Margaret, and be done. That was I'm ready to I'm ready to run your presidential campaign. Just let me know when you're ready. Not that I have any experience, but I want you to be president.
We would have a lot of fun. We would have a lot
Oh
of
my
fun on the
gosh.
road, Liz. You
We
imagine the bus
would.
culture? It would be amazing.
Oh my
It would
gosh.
be amazing.
Maybe we should do that.
Maybe we should just fake it and like make it into a reality TV show.
No,
That
that's
would be
what I'm
great.
saying. Right.
Yeah.
Like it's not really about running for president. It's about putting a new message out there. Okay, so in addition to teaching and running, potentially considering running for president, what other projects are you, given all these big thoughts you're having, lifelong learning, how are they manifesting? Like, what are you excited about that you're working on today? And what are you nerding out about beyond your sewing machine? That's cool if that's your answer. Don't want to judge that, but
it's interesting. The last year and a half have been pretty rough. Like, I lost my father at the end of 2021. I mean, he was 90 and lived an amazing life, but it's a big milestone to lose your parent. And then obviously work, as you can imagine, pretty stressful, etc. And so I really had to take some time off just to kind of care for my mental health. And I think because I was so burned out, I started to wonder, like, maybe I'm just done with design. And by the way, that's a totally legitimate life choice for me to make, right? So I'm not saying people like do these career pivots and like, I think that's awesome. And I really had to give myself time to kind of detox in a way, and to allow, I almost think of it as like a field that's left to kind of fallow for a while so that it can like rebuild its nutrients. And I didn't know like where it was going to head. And I'm a very instinct driven person. Like, in addition to the dirty secret that I'm not actually that into technology, it's like a total means to an end. The other is that I'm not a particularly data driven person. Like, I'm very instinct driven, and my instincts are pretty good. Like, they've helped me to make really good decisions over the years. And I've had this really interesting experience over the past like 6 to 12 months of intuitively leaning into things that I'm interested in without like a clear agenda as to why. And of course, I have this background in design and tech and in ethics, based on the work that I'd done at Meta. But the two areas that I had mentioned before that I was really leaning into is climate change, because intuitively I'm like, we're all going to be working on climate. Like, I'm already behind by 20, 30 years. So now's the time. Signed up for this amazing course with an organization called Terra.do, where it's this program that basically helps people who are interested in getting into climate change in a variety of ways just get a very broad working knowledge of climate change, like the financial aspect, the communication aspect, all that kind of stuff. And then at the same time, I've been very interested, as I mentioned, and talk about something you have to engage with a lot of humility, but just studying Indigenous wisdom, Indigenous communities. There's like a lot of shame that as a white person, I feel like studying Indigenous history, but I have to like make sure that that shame does not keep me from supporting those communities and learning from and trying to figure out ways to empower. And what was so interesting to me was this realization of how all of these topics are converging: design, technology, ethics, climate change, Indigenous communities. And I was like, they're all there. It's like all these rivers coming together, right? And so taking this class and doing these studies has just like reinvigorated me in such an exciting way. I feel kind of like a similar energy to when I was coming out of graduate school and like when the browser was released. And I'm like, holy Moses, I don't totally know what I should be doing here, but I feel intuitively so confident. And that's such an exciting feeling to have, whether it's like after you come out of college or in the middle of your career or, whatever, all these life changes. When you feel your gut telling you like, I don't even know how to explain to people why this is the right direction, I just know it. That's kind of where I'm at. And it even feeds into like my hobbies. Like because I was saying I was a crafter, right? So unrelated to initially to climate change, I started getting interested in visible mending. So this is a practice where instead of throwing away your clothes, you fix them. Got interested in it initially through a company called Toast, which is a company out of the UK that actually runs classes teaching people how to repair their clothing instead of throwing them away and buying new stuff. And I was like, that's intuitively interesting to me. And also the craft of doing visible mending is really beautiful because instead of denying that something is ripped, you actually show it and you respect the lifetime of that garment or that object and you celebrate it. And there's in particular a very long-standing practice of this in Japan through repairing ceramics and fabric. And the object has its own stories to tell, right? And I just thought philosophically that was kind of beautiful. And then, of course, I realized like the fashion industry is one of the most wasteful industries in the world. And we're all fueled by consumerism and fast fashion to constantly buy new clothes and throw them out. And it's terrible for the environment. So again, just one of these examples of all of this stuff just converging. Like, let's reduce our consumerism. Let's repair our clothing. Let's like create beauty. Let's celebrate like the fact that things have a life and you can extend them. And I thought because this was going to come up, I'll show you something that I've been working on. This is a pair of my husband's jeans that I stole from him and all of the repair work that I've like done on them. And it's very like wabi-sabi. It's not like particularly like perfect, but that's kind of the point too. So anyway, I am super excited about figuring out an angle to get involved in climate change. I feel like in my teaching, I'm going to try to figure out how to integrate, understanding climate change, Indigenous studies to the extent that I can empower Indigenous teachers to do that. And just in general, bring a much more varied perspective to what it means to design responsibly. These like somewhat unexpected directions, but then when you think about them, they all make sense that they fit together.
I love that. And I also love that you've been taking time to detox. I feel like it's very important. Something that I think as students, we also need to take time to reflect. We're always like, especially we're on the quarter system, we're like, what's the next class? What's the next class?
Totally.
But yeah, to take time and reflect.
And by the way, like I should say that it's a position of privilege to be able to do that. And a lot of people don't have that option. So I'm very aware of that. But as I have reflected on, the only thing worse than not being aware of your privilege is having it and not using it for societal benefit or like still doing work that you're past or is not fulfilling to, you know what I'm saying? It's like, be aware of it and then like do something interesting and good with it.
I've also been thinking about AI and climate and how those are very intertwined but not being talked about much. Like one conversation with ChatGPT uses like a 500 milliliter water bottle, and that's like a lot of water if you're thinking about all the students who are using ChatGPT for their homework or on the daily. And so what you said was just a great reminder of thinking about how in the future all of these things that seem disparate are going to connect. Yes. And so that was a great segue to the next question. What do you see for the future of design and technology? But also I'm just going to leave it to you to define what that future is, given that you're finding all these intersections.
At a very high level, and I guess this is what I aspire to do in teaching, in advising companies, in writing, to the extent that I do that, is to cultivate this capacity to recognize dilemmas and duality and to help people navigate those things. Like, it's very easy to feel like you're constantly in an existential crisis when you get into a space like this, because, like the butterfly effect where it's like, oh my God, if I move, someone's going to get hurt. And there's actually a reality to that is very dissonant with the optimism and hopefulness that fuels most designers and engineers. And I think one of the best things that I can do and that design as a practice can do is be one of the disciplines that honestly engages in that reality, but in a hopeful and constructive way. It's like, thank goodness we know and understand about social inequity. I mean, I think I still have a ton to learn about that, but I'm aware that it's something I need to learn about, and therefore I can integrate it into my practice, as opposed to building something, releasing it, and then after the fact, finding out that I've harmed the very people that I sought to help. And so to me, that's a hopeful thing. It complicates things because a lot of the tech industry is very focused on efficiency and optimization. And by definition, a lot of this stuff intentionally slows things down. And, I think it reflects in the practices that I've developed personally as I've been working on these like huge platforms and these fast moving companies, that my hobbies are unbelievably inefficient. Like when I tell you there's nothing efficient about knitting a sweater for somebody, there's nothing efficient about repairing these jeans. But it's super satisfying, and it's almost like an antidote, because you see, I'm not doing this because it's efficient. I'm doing it because it's joyful and symbolic. And then when I give something to somebody that I've knit or repaired, it reflects a set of values. And so to me, that's really kind of where I want things to head, is to not deny the fact that efficiency and optimism are crucially important, and actually in certain cases, absolutely the right way to operate. But it's not the only way to operate. And actually building friction back into the system is a huge part of our jobs. And having the wisdom to know when is friction societally beneficial and when is it not.
It's such a gift to hear you and to hear you talk, and how lucky I am to have met you years ago and for you to share this really priceless knowledge. I can't tell you how many people are going to just be thrilled to hear you talk about your life and your career so authentically. So thank you for this gift you are giving to the world. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And it's just great to spend time with both of you.
That was Margaret. You can find out more about her work in the show notes. And you can learn more about this show by going to technicaldifficultiespodcast.com. Drop us a note at technicaldifficultiesteam@gmail.com, or leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps people discover the show. We're especially curious to know what stories and insights resonated.
This show is produced by Lauren Lynn and Liz Gerber and made possible by the Center for Human-Computer Interaction and Design at Northwestern. Thank you so much for listening.